Hello and welcome to the March 2026 edition of Virginia Wine and Song, the Virginia YouTube channel where we pair a Virginia wine with a piece of music, typically an underrated or overlooked or long forgotten album from the classic rock era, classic pop era, which I have defined as between 1964 and 1999. That's my definition. You can argue with me if you'd like in the comments. But I stand firm on that, in my definition at least. So anyway, we're going to talk today about an Irish theme here. We're going to have an Irish theme. We've got a couple of days before St. Patrick's Day in 2026, so I decided to do an Irish thing. We're going to talk about a winery. The name of the winery is Firefly Cellars. Firefly Cellars is located in Loudoun County. It's in Northern Virginia. I'm trying to get out of my bubble here of Shenandoah Valley, where I live, trying to expand. I used to live in Northern Virginia, and I went to a lot of wineries there, but now that I'm no longer there, I very rarely go there. But I went to Firefly Cellars quite often. And Firefly Cellars is a winery that a lot of people just kind of forget about because they're surrounded by so many other wineries that are more well-known in Loudoun County. And Firefly Cellars is kind of small. It's in a kind of a cabin, a rustic cabin. It's directly on Route 9, leading towards Hillsborough and Harper's Ferry in Loudoun County. Very easy drive. I mean, the parking lot is right there against. In fact, you can probably, if you're not careful, you could drive right by it and not even realize you drove by it. So you may have to make a U-turn or turn around, but because they're easy to miss. I think they do have a highway sign. I'm not sure, but anyway, Firefly Cellars is a small winery that has pretty much everything you would want in a winery, except one thing, which I'll talk about in a moment. It's got, of course, it's got wine, it's got snacks, it's got a nice seating area in the back. It's not a very big establishment. Occasionally they have live bands there. It's not as big as, like I said, some of the other well-known wineries in Loudoun County. And I kind of tend to prefer the smaller ones anyway. I don't like the ones where, if I see a big bus in front of a winery, like a big, Chariots for Hire bus or the keg bus, if the keg bus is still around, hopefully not. Anyway, that's another argument for another day. But anyway, if I see a bus in a parking lot of a winery, I usually turn around because it usually means kind of a rowdy crowd there. And I don't really want to be around that. It's good for business, obviously, for the winery, but it's not good for like the aesthetics of being at a kind of relaxing in a winery. And this winery is so small, they don't really have a lot of that, but they do have really, really good wine. And they've been making wine here for a number of years. And their vineyards are actually, I think they have a small vineyard on the premises, a very small vineyard. I think the small vineyard in the premises is mainly for show. Most of their grapes are from vineyards throughout Virginia and different parts of Virginia. But they have, for the whites, they've got Chardonnay, Viognier, and a white blend. You can probably pick one of those three and be happy, especially if Chardonnay is so popular. Very good, very light. The Chardonnay has got a little apple and a little pear overtone. I really like the reds there. They have a Petit Verdot, of course. They have a Cab Franc. Name a winery in Virginia that does not have a Cab Franc, you probably come up pretty dry. Maybe Chrysalis doesn't have one because they focus on Norton there, but I don't know. Cab Franc, Petit Verdot. They have a Chambourcin. Chambourcin does very, very well in Northern Virginia, Loudoun County, and Firefly is no exception. They even have a red blend, which is a blend of Cab Sauv, Cab Franc, and Petit Verdot. Perfect Virginia blend right there. Can't go wrong with any of that. And they even have a couple of sweeter wines, dessert wine types, a port wine, and they also have right now they have a Traminette, a sweet version. Traminette is already kind of sweet or off dry, but here's a pure sweet Traminette. And I've heard this on occasion from people who are just getting into Virginia wines or wines in general, especially people who are a little on the younger side. They're Generation Z, they're in their 20s, and they're just getting into wine after drinking whatever else they drank when they were in college and whatnot. And usually when you get into wine, at least most people, myself included, you kind of start with the sweets and you kind of evolve into the drier wines. So I've heard people talk, especially younger people, say some of the wineries in Virginia, there are not enough sweet wines here. Why don't they have any sweet wines? Well, this winery does. So you can't go wrong with this winery. Something for everything. So Firefly Cellars, nice little location. The one thing I will say, and this is something that unfortunately I'm seeing more and more of this, they do not offer counter tastings. They only do flights, and that's kind of a holdover from the pandemic era. I personally like counter tastings. It's just, it's just a fact of Flights are a lot more economical for the wineries. They don't have to have as many staff. With tastings at the counter, you have to have more people on staff to do the tastings. With flights, you don't really need that many people. I understand that, especially when the wineries are trying to come out of a really bad economic situation, the pandemic, and then a couple of years ago we had a freeze, and a lot of wineries lost a lot of their crop. So when they have stuff like that happening, you can understand why they don't want to have a big staff. But I do miss that touch before the pandemic, when a lot of the wineries did counter tastings, and you could interact with the owners or the people working behind the bar, and you can even interact with strangers who are next to you at the bar. So they don't have tastings there. A lot of wineries in Virginia, some of the wineries still do have counter tastings, but you have to go kind of outside of the perimeter of Northern Virginia to find those. Those are the wineries that are in the Shenandoah Valley where I live, but also around the Waynesboro area and getting into Southwest Virginia, and maybe even a couple around Charlottesville still do counter tastings. So it all depends on what their business model is. But anyway, I'm not going to take anything away from the winery for that. I know their wines are good. It would be nice to interact more with the staff, but you can get a flight, or you can get just a bottle to go or enjoy there at the winery. So that's Firefly. Firefly. I think they were called something. I think they were called Firefly Hill before, or Firefly. There was something else after Firefly before, but now they're just known as Firefly Cellars. So maybe there was another winery called Firefly Hill somewhere. I think that's what they were called. Firefly Cellars has been around in that location since about 2019, right before the pandemic hit. They switched owners. The previous owner was a winery called Hunter's Run Barn, in the exact same location, the same structure, that barn they have there, and it was called Hunter's Run Barn. And I've been to Firefly Cellars a couple of times. I went there before the pandemic, and I went there after the pandemic. But my main experience with this winery was under the original owners, which was Hunter's Run Wine Barn, and it was owned by a couple, and Jerry. She was one of the owners. She was originally from Ireland, which is why I'm kind of focusing on this winery, because the original owners, at least the two sisters who were there a lot, Jerry, and I think the other sister was named Anne, and they're both from Ireland. So I decided to concentrate on this winery, talk about the new incarnation, which is Firefly Cellars, which is very, very good, and then talk about what they were originally known as, which was Hunter's Run. Hunter's Run Cellars, and this is actually a bottle of kind of a port style they did. This is the last bottle that I bought from the original owners when they were still called Hunter's Run Wine Barn, and it's been on my wine rack for so long. It's actually got dust on the bottle, and you kind of want to have dust on your bottle, especially if it's a port, because port, if you age it right, you can age port for decades. I mean, I've read stories where people have found on Mount Vernon, the property of George Washington, Monticello, and also George Washington, Thomas Jefferson, Monticello, George Washington, Mount Vernon. Okay. Got to go back to history for that. On the property of George Washington's, Mount Vernon, they have uncovered old bottles of whiskey that were around from Washington's day. And they were still in the bottles, and they are probably still good. I don't know if they've tried them. I don't think they really want to open them because they're so historic now. But I would presume if they were stored properly, perhaps, in this case, in the case of Mount Vernon, they found them underground. They found them in some underground storage area on the property of Mount Vernon. And apparently around Monticello, Thomas Jefferson's home, they also found some bottles of wine that were, I think, red. But who knows? Who knows if they're good or not? But anyway, this is a bottle that I bought, I think around 2018 or so, right? The last year of operation for Hunter's Run Tasting Barn. And it's a port style, and it's got a clover on the bottle. And it went really, really well. I decided to get, these usually go for a little bit more. I think back then I paid maybe $32 for it. Now this kind of type of wine will probably go for a lot more, because port style, you can age it for so long. This happens to be 17.5% alcohol by volume, which is very high. And the higher the alcohol, especially if you have it stored properly, you can store it for a long time. So I'm saving this, probably not for this St. Patrick's Day, but at some point in the near future I'll open it. Maybe if I open it, the leprechaun from Lucky Charms will pop out or something. Who knows? Anyway, this is Hunter's Run, and the previous name of the winery, where Firefly Cellars currently sits. I do not have a bottle of wine from Firefly Cellars right now, but I have been there and I can vouch for them. Very good. Okay, so that is the wine I'm talking about here. Very Irish-themed wine. We're going to talk now about an Irish artist. And I looked through my music collection, and I actually don't have a lot of Irish rock. I have U2, but the U2 albums that I have are not what I would call underrated or overlooked. So I decided not to go with U2. I decided to go with Van Morrison, and I have a lot of his albums, but most of the albums I have by Van Morrison are also very well known, so I can't really talk about the really well known ones. So I'll talk about the ones that are lesser known, and Van Morrison had a lot of albums that he put out. He's still putting out music to this day. He's actually from Northern Ireland, so I'm kind of cheating here a little bit. He's not from Ireland proper. He's from Northern Ireland, but if you're a die-hard Irish patriot, even, I won't mention the IRA or anything like that, but you probably still believe that Northern Ireland is really Ireland, but that's a political discussion for another time. I'm going to talk about Van Morrison, and this particular album is, I consider it to be very underrated. It came out right around the time where he was putting out some classic records like Astral Weeks and Moondance. This album is called Van Morrison and His Band and the Street Choir. And this, to me, I think this is the closest album that Van Morrison did that comes to real bona fide, just kind of folksy blues rock, but with an Irish edge to it. It's got very almost like gospel-y type songs on here. So it's got a lot of Americana in here, but there's also a lot of the Irish stuff that you would expect to hear from Van Morrison. And it's a great album. This is not a remastered copy. I bought a used copy of this somewhere. It's in good condition. Van Morrison, His Band and the Street Choir. It's got a picture of them in the back. And Van Morrison has this reputation of being a real moody, almost kind of a misanthrope in a way. He doesn't do a lot of interviews. He can come off kind of grouchy. In fact, I even know somebody who went to see him in concert in the 90s, and he was in a bad mood. And because he was in a bad mood, he gave a really horrible concert. My friend said it was the worst concert he'd ever been to, and he loves Van Morrison. So Van Morrison, you gotta respect the guy, though. He's a real artist, and he knows what he's doing with his different sounds. I mean, a lot of his albums they're different from one album to the next. So like I said, this is a used copy that I picked up at a used record store. Always inspect the vinyl when you go to a used record store. And look, the label is even green, okay? So it's the original Warner Brothers label from the 1970 era. And that's when this album came out in 1970 on the green Warner Brothers label. The big song on here, the song that most people probably have heard of, is Domino. Domino, I think, was actually a top 20 hit for him. Kind of a jazzy, kind of like the Van Morrison that you're familiar with. But the rest of the album is really, like I said, kind of rootsy, gospel-y. Blue Money is a really great song on this. It's like I said, it's almost like something that you could have recorded in Alabama or something. So, but it's got this great Irish edge to it. So anyway, this is a highly underrated album by him. I don't have this on CD. I only have it on vinyl at the moment. However, because it is approaching St. Patrick's Day, I am going to talk about a few other albums by Van Morrison, okay? Because I have a lot of bands from Scottish rock bands, but I don't have a lot from Irish. I was surprised. Like I said, I only have U2 and Van Morrison. So anyway, another album by Van Morrison I think is really underrated. I don't have this one on vinyl, but I have it on CD. It's Tupelo Honey. Tupelo Honey came out in 1973. I think I want to say 72 or 73. Doesn't have the year on it. It's weird that a lot of these older albums don't have the years of release on them. I'll never understand that. 1971. Okay, 1971. I was off by a couple of years. So a year after the album I just spotlighted, he put out Tupelo Honey. And this big song on here is Wild Night. And this is actually more raucous, a little bit more upbeat. This album here, His Band and the Street Choir, is a little more mellow, a little quieter, an album that you want to hear kind of, while you're having dinner. And after you have your dinner and you want to have your port wine and you want to hear something that's a little more lively, put on Tupelo Honey, because this opens with Wild Night. And it's got songs on here I consider to be really good drinking songs, like Moonshine Whiskey. You can't get any more of a drinking song than that. Moonshine Whiskey. And the best song on this album, I think, is the title track, Tupelo Honey, which is just a gorgeous, gorgeous song by him. One of his best songs, if not his best song. So anyway, very underrated as well, Tupelo Honey. And I'm not finished yet, because again, we're in Ireland here. We're going to talk about the album he put out in 1989. And a lot of people don't remember that, you know, he's still making music today. He put out an album in 1989 called Avalon Sunset. By the way, this is remastered. He put out a remastered series of records by Polydor in the 2000s. And this is Tupelo Honey, remastered on the Polydor label. And this is Avalon Sunset. And the reason I picked this is he actually has a spoken word song on here. He's got like a poem that he speaks, he reads, he doesn't sing, and he's got his Irish brogue. He talks about, I think it's called Coney Island, and he talks about being from Ireland and coming to New York City as an immigrant and living on Coney Island, and what it's like to be Irish and living in New York City at the turn of the century and going to Coney Island. He actually recites this with his brogue, so perfect for the St. Patrick's Day. There weren't really a lot of hits from this album. This album was kind of really under the radar. In 1989, people weren't really thinking about Van Morrison. There were so many other acts that were out in '89 that were taking the spotlight off of him, but he did put this out. The big song on here is Have I Told You Lately? And a lot of people don't know this, but Have I Told You Lately That I Love You, which is the song, the title that most people know by, a lot of people think that's Rod Stewart. That's a Rod Stewart song. And yes, Rod Stewart did cover that song, like I think 2 years after this album, but it's a Van Morrison song. Van Morrison wrote it, and he features it here on this album. It was not a single. Rod Stewart went in, in Rod Stewart's defense, he went into this album, and took that song and thought, he could sing it. So Rod Stewart covered that, and it became a hit by Rod Stewart. But anyway, the original version was done by Van Morrison. This is Avalon Sunset, Tupelo Honey. Two great. Go ahead and stream them if you want to listen to something on St. Patrick's Day besides U2 or Sinead O'Connor or God, I don't understand why I can't think of any more Irish bands. Kind of weird. Listen to these two, and then of course this one here, the creme de la creme on vinyl. Van Morrison, his band, and the Street Choir. All great listening material while you drink. If you find a port, by the way, like I said, Firefly Cellars does currently have a port. They've got a port-style sweet wine. It's $32, which is not a bad price for a port wine. It's probably a smaller bottle, but anyway, worth checking out. Do check out Firefly Cellars, and thank you for watching, and have a happy St. Patrick's Day, and we'll see you next month.